The arena's tension cracked in the first round as Sang-woo, brilliant yet ruthless, kills Gi-Hun before the game even begins. Trust shatters, alliances crumble, and survival becomes a cold, lonely struggle where every decision weighs on the heart, and each choice could cost a life or crush the soul. The story twists instantly, leaving players and viewers in a world where fear dominates and compassion dies before it even recites. And recap of characters: Gi-Hun is a man drowning in failure, haunted by gambling debts, chased by loan sharks, and estranged from his family. He seems careless and reckless, yet beneath that weakness lies genuine compassion, a warmth that keeps him human even in despair. In contrast, Cho Sang-woo once embodied success, admired as the pride of his neighborhood after reaching Seoul National University. Outwardly respected, he secretly hides financial crimes and crushing debt, surviving through cold calculation rather than kindness. When both enter Squid Game, their childhood bond resurfaces amid chaos. In the deadly opening round, red light, green light, Gi-Hun nearly dies but is saved by Sang-woo, then later by Ali Abdul, revealing that even in horror, humanity endures. Yet imagine if this crucial moment had taken a darker turn. The branch of possibility rests in Sang-woo's hand. Instead of steadying Gi-Hun, he could have let him slip, or worse, pushed him forward into the deadly gaze of the machine. One choice would erase years of friendship in a heartbeat, shattering the trust that bound them since childhood. In that instant, Sang-woo would reveal himself as ruthless, willing to discard loyalty to guarantee survival. Such a decision would alter the entire story. Gi-Hun, the emotional center of the narrative, would vanish before his journey began, leaving Sang-woo's cold ambition to dominate the stage. The fragile promise of hope would collapse into despair, and players would realize the true horror of the games lay not only in their rules but in the choices humans make under pressure. Betrayal would not simmer until later. It would strike from the opening round, showing survival's brutal cost. How differently would we see Squid Game if the heart of its story was silenced before it ever had the chance to beat immediate fallout? In the game arena, the moment Gi-Hun falls, the arena shifts from mess into silence. His elimination happens in plain sight, the figure many players had begun to notice for his vulnerability and strange blend of humor and compassion. Shock ripples through the crowd because his struggle mirrored their fear, and his presence offered something rare, a fragile sense of relatability in a place where trust barely existed. Now, that presence is ripped away in the very first game, leaving behind only the suffocating weight of loss. Would you dare to keep moving after witnessing a man like him fall so suddenly? Among those most shaken is Kong Sabayok. She had watched Gi-Hun with careful distance, but she sensed the sincerity hidden within his clumsy attempts to connect. For someone who had trained herself to trust no one, his warmth had begun to break through her guarded shell. With his sudden death, those cracks seal shut, and she raises her walls higher than ever. His absence feeds her isolation, reminding her that companionship can be fatal inside the arena. Ali Abdul feels it too, perhaps even more deeply. He had already saved Gi-Hun once, and in that moment, a bond began to form. That bond is now torn away, leaving him drifting in the cold stares of strangers. How do you cling to hope when the one person who made you believe in humanity is gone? For Oh Ilnam, Gi-Hun's energy had been a source of joy, a fleeting spark of equality amid dread. Without him, laughter feels hollow, and the old man searches for another anchor in vain. Meanwhile, suspicion coils around Sang-woo. Whispers spread that he allowed Gi-Hun to fall, or worse, pushed him forward. His image will rot into that of a betrayer. Once the pride of Seoul National University, he now risks becoming the embodiment of cold survival. Even if no one can prove his intent, unease lingers. The audience feels it too, forced to watch the heart of the story collapse in the first round. Without Gi-Hun, the stage belongs to desperation, secrecy, and ruthless ambition, where every moment is heavier, darker, and more uncertain. The warmth that once balanced the cruelty of the game vanishes, leaving only the raw truth of human nature under fire. And with that void, the story is no longer about compassion fighting against despair. It becomes a tale of despair consuming compassion's psychological impact on Sang-woo. From the very first game, Sang-woo carries a burden that twists heavier than most. Abandoning or killing a stranger would already feel cruel, yet leaving his childhood friend to die reshapes the weight. Entirely, Gi-Hun was not just another player. He was a living reminder of the innocence Sang-woo once knew, of simpler days before debt, pressure, and desperation consumed his life. By severing that bond with his own hands, Sang-woo lays every decision afterward on a foundation built from guilt and shadows. How can a man lead when his very first step is betrayal? This guilt does not creep slowly, it hardens him immediately. Instead of gradually slipping toward betrayal as in the original story, ruthlessness defines him from the very beginning. His face may remain composed, yet every glance from other players feels sharper, every whisper echoes with suspicion. If others believe he let Gi-Hun fall, his reputation as the pride of Seoul National University curdles into the image of a cold traitor. He forms alliances with Sabayok or Ali, yet each word drips with tension. Each promise seems fragile, and even companionship feels like a battlefield. By keeping distance to protect himself, he deepens his isolation, forcing his mind further into cold, mechanical calculations till, beneath that armor of control, his conscience gnaws at him. At night, when silence hangs heavy in the dormitory, Gi-Hun's face flashes in his memory, not as a rival but as a friend he chose to sacrifice. The weight eats at his confidence, turning brilliance into paranoia, leadership into suspicion, and survival into a lonely march. He convinces himself that survival demands sacrifice, yet the more he repeats it, the more fragile his mask becomes. Does brilliance truly protect him, or will guilt be the crack that breaks him apart? Ripple effect on Ki Ali and Chess. Gi-Hun's sudden removal does not just take away a player, it rips through the arena like a silent disaster. The fragile web of trust shatters, and every alliance shifts under the weight of his absence. For some, he was a source of stability and quiet comfort. For others, he was a reminder that compassion could still exist inside the cruelty of the game. Now that warmth is gone, leaving the field colder and more hostile. Who can the players turn to when the one person who carried humanity in his flaws is erased so soon? Ali Abdul feels the loss like a wound. In the original story, Gi-Hun gave him something priceless, recognition and dignity. Without that anchor, Ali drifts toward the next figure who seems strong enough to follow. His calm exterior and sharp mind promise protection. And Ali clings to him with complete loyalty when the marbles game comes. The betrayal lands, harder than ever. Because Ali no longer questions, he simply trusts. Kang Se-byok's path fractures in the opposite way. Gi-Hun's kindness once chipped at her icy defenses, but now she withdraws into colder independence. Trust feels dangerous, even fatal, so she shields herself in isolation. Yet survival demands allies, and when she crosses paths with Gi-Hun, the fragile spark of connection may still ignite, but doubt gnaws at it. Without Gi-Hun's moral compass, her isolation risks dragging her down, turning strength into weakness. With every step forward, Do Ilnam, the mysterious player 001, faces a subtle but powerful shift. In canon, he gravitated toward Gi-Hun, testing his kindness and building a quiet bond that gave the story its emotional anchor. Without Gi-Hun, Ilnam redirects his focus. He may gravitate toward Sang-woo, recognizing the value of sharp intelligence, or even observe Deoksu studying how brute strength controls the desperate. Yet this new path alters the secret VIP experiment entirely. The human connection that Gi-Hun provided is gone, leaving Ilnam colder, more detached, and less interested in compassion as he watches the game unfold. Could the absence of empathy make his observations even more dangerous? Deoksu, the violent gangster, benefits most from Gi-Hun's absence. Without the counterbalance of Gi-Hun's subtle defiance and compassion, his dominance spreads unchecked. His gang seizes food, territory, and control, thriving until inevitable greed tears them apart. The resistance that once pushed back now lacks a leader, allowing Deoksu's brutality to last longer and bite deeper at the same time. Hon Mineo gains new freedom. Gi-Hun's compassion once drew players away from her chaotic bargains, but now she utilizes every gap. She may attempt to sway Sabioka with fragile offers or prey on weaker players who crave safety. Her manipulations grow bolder, creating instability across alliances, with the players collapse into chaos faster without Gi-Hun's quiet defiance to guide them. Together, these ripples reshape the arena into something darker. Ali's loyalty becomes tragic. Se-byok's isolation sharpens her risk. Ilnam loses warmth. Deoksu rises unchecked, and Mineo thrives in chaos. Without Gi-Hun, the fragile, a thread of humanity that once softened, the cruelty dissolves, leaving a game ruled by fear, strategy, and raw survival. Alternate outcomes of each game. The absence of Gi-Hun reshapes every round in the competition. His compassion, reckless bravery, and desperate ingenuity were threads that held together fragile moments of hope. With him eliminated in the very first game, the story moves into a harsher path where survival depends on calculation, brute force, and chance rather than kindness or clever improvisation. Each iconic challenge becomes darker, and the balance of survival shifts dramatically. Honeycomb Dalgona. The honeycomb round becomes far deadlier without Gi-Hun's desperate spark of innovation. In the canon timeline, his frantic decision to lick the candy turned the impossible into survival, inspiring players around him to follow suit. That single action spread hope like wildfire across the arena, allowing dozens to endure what should have been a massacre. Without him, that vital moment never arrives. Silence fills the space instead, broken only by the sharp snap of fragile sugar shapes and the deafening crack of gunfire as guards eliminate players one after another. Panic spreads quickly, with screams echoing against the cold walls as hopelessness takes over. Sang-woo, already aware of the challenge, moves with calm precision. His strategy is not born of inspiration but of preparation. He traces the umbrella with careful discipline, each cut measured and controlled, and he emerges alive. Yet his survival feels hollow. The crowd does not feed off his cold calculation in the way they once fed off Gi-Hun's frantic improvisation. What saved many in the canon path now saves only one. Ali faces the task with strength that means nothing against brittle candy. Without an example to follow, he struggles, his hands tightening until cracks form across the surface. His chance of survival drops sharply, and with no guiding light to imitate, the odds fall against him. Sabioke, cautious and steady, tries to navigate her own shape. Yet her chances also weaken without Gi-Hun's discovery to shift the balance. The player pool shrinks far more drastically, as what was once remembered as a clever display of human resourcefulness transforms into a brutal purge. Would the masked audience still feel the thrill of strategy, or would they simply crave more blood? Without Gi-Hun's influence, the round becomes slaughter, and hope evaporates. Tug of war on the Tug of War platform. The absence of Gi-Hun's daring backward step leaves a hollow gap where ingenuity once sparked survival. Sang-woo steps into the void, his voice sharp with authority as he drills the team into rhythm, demanding strength and coordination. The group strains against the pull, each movement mechanical, driven only by logic and brute endurance. Yet the lack of surprise leaves them exposed. If even one heartbeat falters, the rope could snap their fate in an instant. Tilnum, trembling with effort, may fall here, erased long before his hidden truth can unfold. The consequence is staggering. Without his survival, the shadowed experiment he represented collapses, stripping the games of their eerie subtext about morality and companionship. Would the VIPs continue with their cold spectacle without that human layer of curiosity? Or would the games descend into something even more merciless, defined purely by entertainment and wages? Sang-woo, standing over a battered team, carries the heavy weight of failure. His sharp calculation proves efficient yet soulless, and the absence of Gi-Hun's instinctive daring haunts every pull of the rope. In this altered path, survival feels less like victory and more like an echo of what could have been marbles. The marbles round remains brutal, but the emotional core shifts. Without Gi-Hun's compassion, the spotlight narrows on Sang-woo and Ali. Ali, who attached himself to Sang-woo early, follows his guidance without hesitation, treating him almost as a protector. The betrayal that unfolds becomes even sharper because Ali has no alternate bond to lean on. He places complete trust in Sang-woo, only to have it shattered most cruelly. This act defines Sang-woo as the story's heart of darkness, no longer a reluctant betrayer but a figure who has repeatedly destroyed the closest bonds around him. The tragedy of Sabioke and Gi-Hun still takes place, yet without Gi-Hun's presence to frame their moment, it carries a colder tone, more isolated, and devoid of balance. The marbles round becomes a chamber of despair where companionship dies completely, and hope is replaced by betrayal and loss. If you are enjoying watching this video, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Glass Bridge becomes an entirely different battleground without Gi-Hun's hesitant survival instincts. In the canon timeline, his cautious delays and unwillingness to rush forward bought him precious seconds, allowing him to outlast players who plunged to their deaths. That hesitation, mixed with luck, was a quiet strategy that preserved not only himself, but also kept the fragile balance of the group intact without him. However, the stage is dominated by a brutal contest between Sang-woo and Gi-Hun. Their duel transforms the bridge into a test of pure will, where clever manipulation collides with brute dominance. Gi-Hun attempts to control the path by intimidating others into moving first, while Sang-woo seizes moments to outthink and outmaneuver him, taking advantage of every slip in judgment. The tension that builds carries a different kind of weight, since neither man offers compassion to those around them. Every player who steps onto the glass is treated as a disposable piece in their war for control. What once was a desperate yet collaborative struggle now becomes a cold display of rivalry where fear governs every movement. Sabioke, carrying her injury into this round, suffers most from Gi-Hun's absence. In the canon path, his protective hand ensured she endured long enough to reach the finale, keeping a quiet voice of humanity alive in the arena. Without him, her odds collapse. She faces the bridge alone, with no shield against the chaos that rages between Sang-woo and Gi-Hun. She falls early. The final act of the games grows even more merciless. The absence of her perspective strips away one of the last fragile strands of empathy in the story's Squid Game. The final round transforms completely without Gi. In canon, the closing duel between Gi-Hun and Sang-woo was charged with moral conflict. Two childhood friends, torn apart by desperation yet still bound by history. In this altered story, the match is driven by violence and survival without that layer of compassion. Two likely outcomes emerge. One is Sang-woo versus Gi-Hun, a savage confrontation between cunning intelligence and raw brutality. Their battle highlights strategy against strength, with blood soaking the sand as each man fights without restraint. The other possibility is Sang-woo versus Sabioke, a tragic clash between cold calculation and quiet resilience. Such a finale would be darker, with Sang-woo facing the haunting reflection of every bond he has shattered. In either path, the game concludes not as a question of morality but as a brutal struggle where victory belongs to the one who abandons humanity most completely. Tone of the altered games. What emerges is a story stripped of its fragile balance. Gi-Hun once carried the faint light of compassion into a world designed to suffocate it, proving that even in an arena built for blood and betrayal, kindness could still survive without him. That light never flickers. Every round tilts deeper into despair. Honeycomb transforms into a massacre. Tug of war becomes a display of calculation without unity. Marbles dissolves into cruelty. The glass bridge collapses into ruthless rivalry, and the Squid Game finale devolves into pure spectacle. A contest where violence is celebrated and empathy has no place to stand. The shift alters the very purpose of the games. What once tested both survival and humanity now erases one side of the equation. The challengers stop asking whether players can hold onto their souls, instead demanding only whether they can endure the carnage. For those trapped inside, the ripple means harsher alliances, quicker betrayals, and more lifeless bodies piling on the floor with no pause for grief for those watching from the shadows. The absence of Gi-Hun reshapes the narrative they consume. No longer do they witness a fragile struggle between brutality and kindness. They instead watch a relentless spiral into gray morality and ruthless ambition. Thematic shifts of the story in the original story. Squid Game carried a fragile yet persistent thread of hope. Through Gi-Hun, viewers witnessed a deeply flawed man who still managed to show compassion even when surrounded by death and desperation. His kindness toward Ollie, his attempts to protect Esabia, and his final act of mercy toward Sang-woo all reinforced the idea that humanity could survive within cruelty. Despite the brutality of the games, the message held that compassion remained possible, even when survival seemed impossible without Gi-Hun. That theme disappears. From the very first round, the narrative shifts toward betrayal, ambition, and selfishness as the primary forces driving survival. Sang-woo's choice to let his childhood friend die sets the tone early. Instead of slowly unraveling his morality, he reveals his ruthlessness at the beginning, and the games unfold under his shadow. Every bond that forms up, what remains is a story about how desperation consumes humanity, not how humanity resists it for the audience. The absence of Gi-Hun removes the emotional mirror that reflected their fears and hopes. Gi-Hun represented the ordinary person, flawed, yet sympathetic, someone who could stumble yet still try to do good. Without him, the viewers are left with characters defined by cold survival. From Sang-woo's paranoia to Deoksu's violence and Minayo's manipulation, there is no figure to root for unconditionally, no human heart to soften the horror. The story becomes about cynicism triumphing over empathy, leaving the audience unsettled in a different way. The critique of capitalism also shifts in canon. The games exposed how financial desperation pushed people into inhumane choices. Yet Gi-Hun's survival carried a sense of redemption. He emerged scarred, but he also carried a spark of defiance, showing that even within a corrupt system, compassion, we could remain alive. In this alternate story, that spark never exists. The message turns darker and heavier, suggesting that within such a system, empathy is crushed before it can breathe. Instead of survival with humanity intact, the lesson becomes survival only through betrayal and selfishness. The critique grows sharper, yet it also denies relief, leaving the audience with a world where cruelty wins without resistance. Outside world aftermath. Sang-woo emerges as the final victor. The prize money secures his financial freedom, yet it delivers no peace of mind. He pays his debts and erases the weight of creditors, but the victory feels hollow. Every coin is stained with memories of betrayal. From Gi-Hun's fall in the first round to Ollie's tragic trust in the marbles game, far from triumphant, Sang-woo spirals inward, consumed by guilt that grows heavier with each passing day. And like Gi-Hun, he never seeks to resist the system or uncover its secrets. His win does not inspire defiance. It only deepens his isolation. He avoids his family, unable to face the disappointment in their eyes or explain the cost of his survival. The man once celebrated as a brilliant success fades into silence. Burdened not by debt but by conscience for the frontman and the VIPs, nothing changes. The game runs smoothly, undisturbed by moral defiance or survivor resistance. With Gi gone, there is no voice left to question the cruelty of the system. Sang-woo's life becomes a quiet collapse, and the deadly contest continues unchecked, feeding on the desperate as it always has. Meta-analysis. Would Squid Game still work? The heart of Squid Game rests not only in its shocking violence or clever game design, but in the emotional anchor provided by Gi-Hun as the protagonist. He offered a mirror for the audience, flawed enough to feel real, yet compassionate enough to embody the humanity that struggled to survive in the arena. His role was crucial because he balanced despair with hope and cruelty with empathy. Without him, the series would shift into a colder narrative that might still shock but would lose the resonance that made it a global phenomenon. If Gi-Hun were removed in the first round, the audience would be forced to follow Cho Sang-woo instead. Sang-woo is brilliant, but his calculated nature makes him a difficult character to fully embrace as the face of the story. While viewers may admire his intelligence, they would struggle to connect emotionally. His early betrayals would paint him as an anti-hero at best, and as the central figure, the series would lean heavily into cynicism. The emotional balance of the original story would collapse because there would be no counterweight to remind audiences of kindness in the midst of brutality. The thematic message would also shift dramatically. In canon, Gi-Hun's survival proved that compassion could coexist with survival, and his refusal to spend the prize money immediately emphasized the cost of cruelty. Without him, the ending would present survival as possible only through betrayal and selfishness, stripping away nuance and leaving a bleaker statement. The critique of capitalism would remain strong, but without hope, it would feel like a void rather than a challenge to resist for a global audience. Gi-Hun's presence was what allowed Squid Game to transcend cultural boundaries. Viewers from every background could see themselves in his flaws and root for his growth. Without him, the show would lose much of its universality. Sang-woo could carry the plot but not the heart. The games would still terrify. The visuals would still shock. Yet the absence of Gi-Hun would remove the thread of humanity that made Squid Game unforgettable. If Sang-woo had killed Gi-Hun in round 1, the entire Squid Game would have unfolded in a darker, colder way. Do you think the story would still have carried the same weight without its heart? Share your thoughts below. Hit like if this twist fascinated you, and subscribe for more powerful what-if stories. Do not forget to share this video so others can dive into the debate with you.